The story kicks off in a medieval world where our main guy, Rio, wakes up inside an empty cottage. No furniture, no cozy bed, just a table, 2 books, and a lonely knife. But does he read the books or arm himself? Nope. He steps outside for some fresh air instead. Classic protagonist move. Surrounded by towering mountains, Rio checks his hands and mutters, "Water, come forth," and bam, a little splash of water appears. Magic confirmed. But how did we get here? A few days earlier, Rio found himself floating in a white, endless void. Before he could panic too much, an angel appears, reads his mind like an open book, and reassures him that he's not in the afterlife yet. The angel, whom Rio mentally nicknames Michael, cheerfully admits he's been lonely in this realm for years, but also breaks the news that Rio got flattened by truck Kun back on Earth. Ouch. Rio, being genre savvy, immediately realizes he's getting reincarnated. He tells Michael he just wants a slow, peaceful life. Michael says, "Sure, buddy," and reincarnates him in a place called Faya Magical World where only 20% of people can use magic. Lucky for Rio, he's one of them, and he's best matched with water magic probably because of that chill lifestyle request. Michael drops him into a cottage in the middle of the Rondo Forest. He stocked the place with food and 2 books, one about the world and one about magic. After actually reading the book finally, Rio learns how to summon water and starts getting the hang of magic. He even figures out that he doesn't need to say spells out loud, just imagine them, and boom, magic happens. Not bad for a beginner. He uses his water magic to fill up the bathtub, only to realize the water's freezing cold. Time to make fire. He tries the good old caveman method and fails miserably. But then, using some high school chemistry, he splits water into hydrogen and oxygen, accidentally freezes it into ice, then uses the ice as a magnifying glass to focus sunlight and start a fire. Fire unlocked. Bath achieved. Clean and relaxed, he realizes he'll soon run out of food. But going outside means monsters, and that tiny knife Michael gave him isn't going to cut it literally. So, he starts working on attack spells. His first attempt, Water Ball, is about as threatening as a water balloon. He tweaks it into Water Jet, but it still can't damage a tree. He switches focus to Ice Magic Stronger, but way harder to control. After days of trial and error, he becomes decent enough to form ice crystals, even if he still can't shoot them like projectiles. With time running out, he sharpens one into a makeshift spearhead and ventures into the forest. While gathering herbs, a lesser boar charges at him. Rio freezes in fear, pun intended, but just before becoming bacon bait, he snaps out of it, slides away, ices the ground, and skewers the boar with icicles. Victory, sort of. Turns out, lesser boars are the weakest monsters in the forest. Back home, he reads up on more monsters. Dragons? Run. Akuna? Don't even try. Just pray. Still, Rio's not giving up. The next day, he finds some fruit, and just when things are looking up, an assassin hawk dive bombs him. It uses invisible air magic, and he realizes running is pointless. So he traps it in ice. Thinks it's dead. Surprise? It's not. The hawk escapes with only one eye. Days pass. Rio trains like crazy, fighting weak monsters, fishing, refining his ice powers until he can slice through mountains. But every night, he returns to where he saw a Dullahan, a spooky, headless warrior with smoke pouring from its neck. They spar regularly, and while Rio keeps losing, he suspects the Dullahan is trying to make him stronger. One day, the Dullahan forges an ice sword and silently offers it to him. Rio accepts. Teacher vibes achieved. Then, the hawk comes back. Bigger, blacker, and angrier than ever. Yep, it evolved. It blasts through all of Rio's defenses like paper. In desperation, Rio grabs the Dullahan's sword and finally defeats the hawk for good. He gives it a moment of respect, realizing it evolved just to fight him. A worthy rival. But the world's not done with surprises. A dragon shows up and talks. Telepathically. Rio's shocked. The dragon's shocked he can use telepathy again. They have a chat, and when Rio shows the ice sword, the dragon instantly recognizes it. It's the sword of the Fairy King. Wait, what? The dragon asks what Rio did to earn such a gift, but Rio has no clue. They part ways, and Rio continues living his not-so-slow life. Meanwhile, Mr. Angel upstairs checks Rio's status screen and realizes he missed something huge. Rio has eternal youth. The last guy didn't have that, so Michael didn't notice. And as Rio enjoys his new powers, a mysterious red-haired boy washes up by the riverbank. Who is he? One day, Rio heads down to the beach. When he gets there, he finds a wrecked ship just chilling on the sand. Curious, he checks it out and spots a guy lying next to it. But then, from the other side of the beach, he hears someone groaning. Turns out, someone did survive. That survivor is Abel, who thought he was going to die at sea after a giant sea monster wrecked his ship during a massive storm. But plot twist, he wakes up in a warm bed, all his stuff neatly placed on a nearby table. He grabs his gear and heads outside, hoping to get his bearings, but all he sees is trees. Right then, Rio strolls out of the house like it's totally normal to be living in the middle of nowhere, half naked in a loincloth. Abel's confused and also mildly concerned about Rio's fashion choices, but before asking anything too rude, he thanks him for saving his life. Rio shrugs it off, saying all he did was carry Abel home. Unfortunately, Abel was the only one left alive. Abel isn't too broken up about it, though they were all illegal smugglers. Rio doesn't totally get what a smuggler is, but whatever time for lunch, Abel's clearly starving. Over their meal, Abel can't hold it in anymore and asks why Rio is dressed like a caveman. Rio calmly explains that he's broke and also isolated. There's literally nowhere nearby to buy clothes even if he had money. Abel's surprised, but honestly impressed. For a guy living in the woods with no resources, Rio's got it pretty together. Abel asks if the meat they're eating was caught with that knife on the table, but Rio says that's just for butchering. He hunts using water magic. To prove it, he casually fills a jug with water. Abel is floored. Where he's from, even in the Central Plains, only half the people can use magic. Rio's surprised too. He was told it was rare. After lunch, Abel says he wants to check something back at the shipwreck. Rio agrees to guide him. On the way, Abel notices Rio doesn't use a magic staff and assumes it's another money issue. Feeling a bit guilty, he offers to handle any monsters they run into as payback for Rio's help. Rio tries to tell him that he can hold his own just fine, but Abel insists. When they get back to the wreck, all the bodies are gone. Rio guesses some monster probably cleaned up the mess. Lucky for Abel that Rio found him first. Abel looks around but doesn't find what he was looking for. When Rio asks what's next, Abel says he needs to regroup with his friends, but they're far north, and he's not even sure how far south he is now. It's going to be a long trip. So he turns to Rio and asks, "Wanna come with me?" Rio is caught off guard but agrees. He's curious about the world beyond the trees anyway. But first, he needs to wrap up a few things, so they agree to leave the next morning. That night, Rio heads out into the forest alone. Abel finds it weird, especially since Rio said there's no one else around, but decides not to pry. Turns out, Rio's meeting Delahan, his forest sparring partner. This might be their last match for a while, so Rio plans to go all out. They duel, and though Delahan is still better, Rio puts up a good fight and even manages to push him back a little. After the match, Delahan gifts Rio a special robe as a farewell present. Rio is genuinely touched. The next morning, the journey begins, but almost immediately, they run into a boar monster. Abel tells Rio to step back, then uses a flashy move called Total Impalement to skewer the beast like a shish kebab. Rio's jaw drops. He's never seen a non-magic move that strong. Abel explains that people who can't use magic fight with combat skills. Later, they reach a marsh full of lizardmen. Abel wants to avoid a fight, But while circling around, Ryo senses the lizards creeping up on them. He warns Abel, who preps for battle, but Ryo decides to take over. With a flick of his hand, he launches a flurry of ice spears and wipes out the lizard squad. Abel is speechless. Afterward, Abel asks how Ryo managed to cast multiple spells at once. Apparently, most mages can only do one at a time. Ryo's confused because he has never had that problem with water magic. Ryo then offers Abel a glass of water, and Abel notices the incantation is different this time. When asked why, Ryo just plays it cool. Truth is, he doesn't need incantations. Eventually, they leave the forest and enter rocky terrain, only to find out they've accidentally wandered into a rock golem hotspot. Rocks start flying, and Ryo is fascinated. These golems look nothing like he expected. Abel tries using total impalement again, but the golem just regenerates. Ryo figures they need a one-shot knockout, so he summons a giant ice cube from the sky and crushes the golems with it. They find a huge magic stone in one of the crushed golems and decide to keep it. Abel mentions that monsters like golems are often found in dungeons. Dungeons? Ryo lights up like a kid at a candy store. Why didn't Abel mention dungeons earlier? Luckily, there's one in Lune, the very town they're headed for. On the way, they chat about dwarves and elves. Dwarves are short, strong, and love crafting. There are a bunch in Lune. Elves, on the other hand, mostly stay in forests and avoid people. Abel only knows one in Lune. Suddenly, Ryo senses something terrifying. A giant griffin appears. Yeah, they're in trouble. Thinking fast, Ryo tosses out some meat. Abel follows suit. The griffin snatches up the snacks and flies away, apparently satisfied. Abel says griffins haven't been seen near human lands in centuries, so if they're showing up here, that mountain is probably holding back all kinds of nightmare fuel. And sure enough, their next encounter is a flock of wyverns. Abel wants to detour, but Ryo's had enough. He jumps out and slams the wyverns with icicle spears like he's playing Whack-A-Dragon. Abel is amazed. Normally, it takes 20 adventurers to take down even one wyvern. After hacking their way through more beasts, they finally reach the other side of the mountain. Ryo and Abel are back on the road, arguing like an old married couple over whether fighting wyverns was a good idea. Ryo? Totally cool with it. Abel? Never wants to see another flying lizard again. Still, he's glad Ryo did it, since they now have a whole bag of shiny magic stones worth a fortune. Eventually, they head far north and spot a narrow road up ahead. Classic clue that a town's nearby. Abel, seeing that the road leads straight to something that looks like Mount Everest, votes to go west instead. He seems to recognize the snowy mountains but keeps it to himself. All he tells Ryo is that following the path east leads to a town called Kayati. Ryo's hyped he's dying to sleep in an actual bed. Abel's surprised that Ryo, the monster-fighting caveman, enjoys soft pillows and hot food. Abel starts telling him about Kayati's local food, saying its chef's kiss amazing. When they arrive, they hit up a restaurant. While Ryo stuffs his face with curry and rice, Abel explains how adventurer guilds work. Register, get an ID, trade loot, and gain access across the country. Ryo's intrigued, especially when he hears that being an alchemist helps, and since he's a chemistry nerd, he's already sold. While eating, he's also stunned that this fantasy world has curry. He whispers to himself that in most isekai anime, the hero has to invent modern food from scratch. Here, it's already on the menu. Blessed. Ryo becomes a total curry mukbanger, ordering seconds, thirds. You get the picture. The next morning, he's still gushing about it, making Abel wonder if this guy ever ate real food before. When Ryo jokes that Abel might be hiding more delicious secrets, Abel reacts a little too weirdly suspicious. On the way to their next town, Lon, they stroll through peaceful farmlands. At the gate, the guard is shocked to see Abel alive. News had spread that he was missing. Abel has no time to explain and just says Ryo saved him. The guard shakes Ryo's hand like he's a national hero. Since Ryo's not registered, Abel pays his entry fee again. As they walk in, Rio realizes Abel is kind of a big deal around here. They head straight to the Adventurers Guild. Abel explains the ranking system, saying Rio can probably skip F rank thanks to his endorsement. He might even start at D rank. Abel also warns that dumping all their magic stones at once could crash the economy, so they'll talk to the guildmaster first. The moment they enter the guild, it's like a celebrity just walked in. Everyone is ecstatic that Abel's alive. Rio, not wanting to get in the way of the Abel fan club, steps outside for a walk. That's when an elf girl spots him and notices his clothes, calling them the Fairy King's outfit. Rio's like, "Fairy, what now?" But she's in a rush and leaves, promising they'll meet again. Abel finds him and pulls him back inside, publicly introducing Rio as the hero who saved his life. After the crowd settles down, they go to the receptionist. Abel pulls rank and asks her to register Rio as a D rank adventurer. She's stunned. No one from Abel's elite Crimson Sword party has ever done this before. She agrees, but says Rio still needs to do a physical assessment. Meanwhile, Abel wants to meet the guildmaster, Hugh, the loud and excitable guildmaster, who crashes into the room thrilled to see Abel alive. Abel asks if surviving that mountain death trap is enough proof of Rio's skills. Hugh agrees and says they'll bump Rio's rank. Before they can finish, Abel's old teammates Lynn, Warren, and Ria barge in. Lynn drops to her knees in shock, crying tears of disbelief. Abel tells them how Rio saved his life, and Hugh gives the group privacy while asking Nena, the clerk, to handle Rio's paperwork. After some Q&A with Nena skills, level, dungeons, etc., Rio signs up for a dungeon class, learns there's a clock in the city WoW, and finds out he can stay in the guild lodge for 300 days. He registers, prints his adventure card, and heads out. Hugh tells Abel how chaotic things were while he was gone. Meanwhile, Abel takes Rio to sell their magic stones and buy him some new clothes and a staff. Rio appreciates it, but questions the staff. He prefers his tiny sword. Abel thinks it's more of a butter knife, but Rio insists it's fine. They chat some more, and Rio learns the days, weeks, and months in this world are just like Earth's. With all the Earth-like things around, especially the curry, Rio starts suspecting another Earthling may have reincarnated and left their mark on this world. Later that day, Abel drags Rio to his welcome party. They drink, laugh, and party like there's no tomorrow. The next morning, Rio is hungover and gets escorted back to the lodge by Nana, who teases him about Abel's brother, Ra, clinging to him all night out of gratitude. At the lodge, Na introduces Rio to his new roommates Niels and Ito. Niels instantly starts simping over Na, while Ito rolls his eyes and greets Rio instead. They all agree to keep things chill between them. Then Na brings in one more roommate, Ian, a 16-year-old who lost her parents and now wants to become an adventurer. Rio's now got a full adventuring squad in his dorm. Meanwhile, Abel tells his team just how insane Rio's magic is. Ice magic. No staff, wyvern slaying. Lynn is in denial. That kind of magic, she says, defies all logic. Ria mentions a legend, the Inferno Magician. But that's just a fairy tale, right? They worry about Rio's power and wonder if he might join the Empire. Abel reassures them that's not happening. Rio hates the Duhai Empire with a passion. Back at the lodge, Rio laughs and jokes with his new roommates, quietly amazed at how crazy his life has become. The next day, the teacher wraps up the intro course after 5 intense days of dungeon training. Now it's time for the real deal, their first trip into an actual labyrinth. Ammon's nervous, but Rio tells him to relax or he'll burn out before they even begin. Before heading out, the teacher answers a clever question from Rio about jumping straight to already cleared levels. Turns out, that's a thing, just not here. Loun's Cavern doesn't allow shortcuts, and even then, it's mostly a southern region rumor. As they approach the dungeon, the teacher drops a fun fact. The entire city was built around this giant labyrinth. Every few years, monsters inside multiply like crazy in an event called the Roar of the Depth. Sometimes, they even crawl out into the city. hence the double walls. At the entrance, they skip the usual registration perks of being students, and the tutor tells them the first floor is pretty tame. They can roam freely, but shouldn't stray too far. Exploring the caves, Rio suddenly senses danger. He freezes the threat with ice magic so Ammon can strike. Turns out it's a soldier ant way too tough for a first-floor enemy. Still, Rio's frost lances and Ammon's sword skills get the job done. They even harvest a magic stone because, hey, adventuring has bills too. Later at the dorm, their roommates cheer their first dungeon run. Niels grumbles about the drink not being alcohol, and Ido reminds him it's dorm rules. They're all surprised the duo beat a soldier ant, but Rio calls it teamwork. Planning their next dive, Rio offers to go as deep as the third layer with Ammon, who's thrilled. But Rio admits that Soldier Ant was out of place, it shouldn't be on the first floor. Niels agrees. Then Bam Abel, leader of the Scarlet Sword, walks in like a celebrity. Everyone fanboys for a second. Abel gives them some sage advice. A real adventurer's best weapon is survival. When his teammates drag him off to report to the guild master, his comrade Lin gives Rio a long, unreadable look. Later, she admits to being curious Rio might just be the real deal. The next day, Rio and Ammon hit Layer 3. Rio snipes with ice magic while Ammon tanks with his sword. After the battle, they rest, and Rio notes that Ammon's swordplay reminds him of Abel. Turns out Ammon trained under an old man named Kira, who studied the elite hewn style. Rio shares that he had a mentor too, though his sword style is, let's say, custom. Rio advises Ammon to build stamina. His style is safe but tiring, and Rio recalls how Abel trained like a man possessed every morning. Inspired, Ammon promises to do the same. The next morning, Rio skips the dungeon and heads to the library because magic is cool, but knowledge is power. He's wowed by the alchemy section and dives into both theory and recipe books. Just as he's settling in, the sky darkens a solar eclipse. Then, chaos. A horned woman crashes the piece with a fire blast. Rio quickly throws up ice shields, barely blocking it. She's not your average baddie, probably on the same level as a behemoth or griffin. She launches fire, wind, and blade attacks, and Rio counters with icy precision. It's an epic dual magic versus raw power. She's fast boosted by wind magic and Rio's forced to defend, but his Fairy King's gear keeps him in the game. Eventually, he lands a hit, but she regenerates instantly. Just as the tide turns against him, it starts raining. Acid rain. That gives Rio an opening, but before he can finish the fight, the eclipse ends and the demon vanishes. Before leaving, she gives her name Leonor Oraka Albuquerque dramatic much. Still shaken, Rio remembers he came to buy books. After grabbing cash thanks to those wyvern stones, he returns to find his dorm empty and his friends cornered by bullies from room 15. Rio doesn't hesitate. 4 guys go down with a splash spell. The last one, Dan, gets knocked out cold with a punch to the gut. Back at the dorm, Rio gets patched up by Ido. Turns out the wind spear from the demon nearly hit his heart. When asked what happened, Rio just says, "Another time." Deep in thought, he realizes there's a lot more to this world than dungeons and demons. Phelps retreats, his attacks useless, while Abel presses on. Using his shadow technique, he dodges the Goblin King's strike and lands a blow to its chest. Not enough to finish it, but that's Lin's cue. With her charged wind bullet, she blasts the king full of holes, ending the fight. Everyone heads back to the guild to celebrate. By the time Rio shows up, he has no clue why the place is so lively. While the adventurers party, the poor guild master is buried under mountains of paperwork, filing reports, calculating payouts, and bracing for the royal researchers who will inevitably show up to poke around the tidal bore. Meanwhile, at the party, Abel is busy filling Rio in on what went down while he was in the library. Lin, however, has been dying to ask Rio something. Can he really create ice walls from a distance? Rio confirms it about 40 meters away, to be exact. But he admits it took him ages to master. so it's not nearly as easy as it looks. Lin is baffled. She's never heard of anyone who could cast magic that far. Curious, she asks if it's some kind of original spell, and what incantation he uses. Rio shrugs. He says he just makes the words up on the spot, so she can chant whatever she wants. Still confused, Lin is left hanging when Niels warns Rio that the food's almost gone. As Rio runs off to grab a plate, Abel explains that Rio doesn't even need incantations, he just uses them because he thinks they sound cool. To Lin, that's somehow even more absurd than the ice walls. The next morning, Niels, Ido, and Ammon gather at the guild for work, only to find the job board completely empty. Rio happens to pass by and asks why they aren't out working as usual. Turns out, the dungeon's been shut down for inspections after the tidal bore. They were hoping to pick up resource gathering jobs, but since the tidal bore dumped so many items, there's no demand. Rio tells them he's actually hunting for magic copper ore to start practicing alchemy. Ido recalls that the ore costs a fortune 50 gold for a single piece. Rio agrees but makes them a deal. He'll pay each of them 4 gold just to look, and if they actually find any, he'll buy it off them for 25 gold apiece. The three nearly faint. That's more money than they've ever seen in their lives. Ido hesitates, asking if Rio's really okay with paying that much. Rio points out that even if they succeed, he'll only spend 37 gold instead of 50, so it's a bargain for him too. Thrilled, the trio rush off to begin their search. Not long after, Rio hears a commotion outside. He finds Dan arguing with a group of knights trying to drag off a girl in broad daylight. Dan frees her, but now he's in trouble. He's outnumbered 4-1, and they're armed. Just as their leader steps forward to teach Dan a lesson, he suddenly trips and faceplants. Everyone is confused. There was nothing on the ground, but when he tries to get up, he trips again. The knights, humiliated, accuse Dan of foul play. At that moment, Phelps arrives and is disgusted to see knights behaving this way. They try to threaten him, but that backfires instantly. Phelps' Heimline is no ordinary adventurer. His father was once the captain of the Royal Knights, giving the Heimline family huge authority over them. Realizing they've picked the wrong fight, the knights quickly retreat. Phelps, however, notices Rio quietly watching and realizes he was the one making the knights trip. Abel had told him about Rio's magic, but seeing it firsthand still left him stunned. Out of gratitude, Phelps keeps Rio's involvement to himself. That night, while eating at the tavern, Rio runs into Abel oddly without his party. Rio teases him about sneaking off to the red light district, which makes Abel panic. After some back and forth, Rio figures out Abel secretly has a crush on Ria, despite Abel's frantic denials. Changing the subject, Abel admits he actually is going to the red light district, but not for fun. The corrupt knights Rio saw earlier are regulars there, and Abel wants to stop them before they hurt someone. On their way, Rio spots 2 shady adventurers in black cloaks, people he's never seen before. Abel says outsiders sometimes come to explore the dungeon, but with it closed, it's suspicious. The cloaked pair immediately flee once they notice Rio and Abel watching. Later, the 2 heroes deliberately walk into a dark alley and, sure enough, get ambushed by the cloaked adventurers. But Rio had already anticipated this, so he casually drops ice on their heads. They hand the group over for interrogation, but it's clear something bigger is brewing. Elsewhere, Phelps lures the corrupt knights into a trap. With Shenna's paralytic needles immobilizing them, he coldly declares that they've disgraced knighthood long enough. Her fire magic burns them to ash, leaving nothing behind. The next morning, the research team from the capital arrives just as Hugh predicted and immediately starts making a mess. Clive, the arrogant leader, seizes the town's food supplies and demands the dungeon be reopened with adventurers to guard him. Hugh argues it's dangerous, but Clive insists. Finally, Hugh agrees, but warns that if anything goes wrong, the blame falls on Clive alone. Clive reluctantly accepts. Around noon, Rio is on his way to eat when a girl runs up, asking for directions to the Adventurers Guild. He guides her there. Her name is Natalie Schwarzkopf, and she delivers a request for Abel's party to escort the researchers into the dungeon. Rio is surprised the dungeon's being reopened at all, but Abel isn't. He explains that decades ago, after a tidal bore, an rank party was sent down and not one of them returned, not even their near S-rank leader. Ever since, closing the dungeon after a tidal bore became guild policy. Rio finds the story interesting, but his stomach wins out. He heads off for food. Meanwhile, Lynn asks Natalie if she really belongs to the famous Schwarzkopf family, known for their legendary water magic. Natalie confirms, so Lynn eagerly asks if she's ever heard of a spell that lets a mage create an ice wall from far away. Nye doubts it's possible, but Abel shuts her down. Rio can throw up an ice wall from 40 meters away. He warns everyone not to mess with Rio. If anyone's dumb enough to try, they should just surrender, since even all of them together wouldn't stand a chance. He even tells Na to go straight to Rio if she ever needs help. 3 days later, Rio's friends return with 2 magic copper ores. Rio pays them 90 gold coins, and they're thrilled they won't need money for a while. Meanwhile, the dungeon team reaches the 7th floor, but it's eerily empty. They discover a strange black square carved into the wall. Excited, MLive orders instruments set up to send data to Natalie's analysis crew. But when Clyde's team pushes a measuring device through the square, they're instantly teleported, and the surface team loses all contact. By the time the adventurers figure out what's happening, they're already standing in the middle of a grassy plain. Luckily, no one's hurt, but they have no idea where they are, and Clive and his research team are nowhere in sight. Elsewhere, Clive wastes no time and orders his team to start gathering data. If his theory is correct, the teleportation gate dragged them all to a completely new location. That means danger could strike at any moment, but Clive is oddly pleased. If monsters really did come from the 38th floor, then this is his chance to prove it. And if he does, he'll surely earn a promotion back at headquarters, provided they survive the demons lurking here. Back on the surface, Natalie and the other researchers are scrambling to figure out what went wrong. Their locator device suddenly flickers back to life, showing the adventurers' signal for just a moment. The reading suggests that the missing team somehow landed on the 40th floor. That's impossible, they were only on the 10th floor minutes ago. As they're reeling from this, a man named Christopher walks into the tent. He introduces himself as a mage from the College of Magic. Technically, his group is a rival to Natalie's team, but he needs answers. He explains that while he was about to enter the dungeon with a second group of adventurers, everyone ahead of him simply vanished into thin air. His story confirms the worst. The adventurers really were teleported, and they somehow skipped all the way down to the 40th floor, a place no one has ever survived. The deepest anyone has gone is the 38th floor, and even B-rank adventurers barely scrape by there. Sending C and D rank parties this deep is suicide. Thankfully, Abel's party is among them, so they can probably hold out for now, but not for long. When Natalie realizes Abel is trapped, she remembers what he told her before leaving, and she rushes off to the library to find Rio. Meanwhile, at the guild, Hugh gets the bad news. Nina explains that the expedition team vanished the moment they stepped into the dungeon, and now even Dean Christopher wants Hugh involved. Hugh leaps from his chair and orders Nina to keep everything secret until he gets back. If word gets out, panic will spread like wildfire among the adventurers. In the library, Rio is struggling to find the books he needs until he bumps into Syrah. She happily points him toward the right section, explaining that eclipses and tidal bores seem connected. In fact, history shows a tidal bore always follows an eclipse. She presses Rio for why he's suddenly so curious, but Rio dodges the question and asks about magic stones instead. Syrah explains that their color depends on how long the monster has lived. That catches Ryo's attention because during the last tidal bore, all the monsters dropped clear stones, meaning they had only just spawned. The same pattern shows up in all past reports too. Meanwhile, underground, Arthur notices something off about the air. It feels like they're trapped inside a massive barrier. Lynn scouts with her magic and detects a group of about 100 humans nearby, along with some unknown creatures. With no other leads, they head that way. Back on the surface, Hugh learns the worst. The expedition really is on the 40th floor. Even if he gathered every adventurer in town, they'd never survive that deep. For now, all they can do is pray the missing team hangs on. But the situation underground is far from hopeful. Clive's group is already under siege, hellfire raining down on them. Adventurers charge in to fight the attackers only to be torn apart in seconds. Clive realizes the truth. These monsters are demons, the kind written about in ancient records. Abel's group arrives just in time to see the massacre. Rihia confirms they're demons, creatures far beyond human strength. Arthur rallies the mages to unleash a pincer attack, and a storm of magic spears slams into the demons. The spells break through, but mana is limited, and the adventurers won't last long. Abel takes the lead, charging in with his sword while Warren shields the team. They manage to cut down a few demons, but soon only Abel is left standing. Then Rihia spots something terrifying. The leader is a demon prince, the juvenile form of a demon lord. According to records, only a hero could ever defeat one. Abel steals himself anyway, but the demon prince is far too fast. It disarms him instantly, and Abel knows he's hopelessly outmatched. Clive blasted the demon prince with a powerful spell from across the field, but it barely scratched him. Worse, the rest of the demons turned their attention to Clive's group, shattering his shield and leaving them exposed to the flames. Things were only going downhill, so Abel went all in, activating his zero-turn skill. He deflected the demon prince's blade, spun on a dime, and aimed straight for its neck. But the prince wasn't fooled. With a swift dodge, it knocked Abel flying. Abel staggered to his feet, but the prince was already closing in to finish him off. That's when Abel herded a single drop of water. Then, out of nowhere, Ryo crashed down from the ceiling. Abel thought he was hallucinating, because there was no way Ryo would show up at a time like this. But Ryo grinned and told him, "Plenty of people are worried about you. Let's head back. I'll take care of things here." Abel tried to warn him that the enemy was a demon prince, but Ryo just laughed it off. After all, he'd fought a demon before, and compared to her, this guy felt like a trainee, a baby demon lord at best. The demons tried to torch him with fire, but Ryo casually countered with icicle lances, and before they knew it, he'd already decapitated the lot of them. The prince turned just in time to see his men's heads hit the ground, realizing this fight wasn't going to be easy. Smirking, Ryo drew his sword. "All right then," he said. "Let's see what you can do." Before this, Natalie had been running all over town looking for Ryo. When she finally found him, she breathlessly told him that Abel and his team were trapped in the dungeon. The moment Ryo heard it, he wasted no time. He froze up a cart around Natalie and raced her straight to the dungeon entrance. By then, Natalie had already explained everything to Rudo, who was glad she acted so quickly. Still, he was curious how she even knew to look for Ryo in the first place. Natalie explained that a few days earlier, Abel had told her, if anything ever went wrong and she couldn't reach him, she should find Ryo because Ryo was the most dependable guy he knew. That sounded exactly like something Abel would say, and it made Ryo happy to know his friend thought so highly of him. But there was no time to bask in the compliment. He dashed toward the gate, brushing past the dungeon guards who tried to stop him. Instead of arguing, he simply froze up some ice walls and went in anyway. Natalie had mentioned that the distress signal came from the 40th floor, but Ryo didn't bother with the normal path down. Instead, he blasted through the floors with water jets until he reached his destination. That's where the real fight began. The demon prince charged at him first, but its movements were far too slow. Ryo stepped aside and casually sliced off its head in one clean motion. Abel and the others were stunned until the demon prince picked up its head, reattached it, and kept going. Ryo admitted regeneration could be a hassle, But since the demon couldn't hurt him anyway, it was just a matter of time. To prove his point, Ryo summoned over 200 razor-sharp water jets and reduced the demon prince to dust. This time, there'd be no coming back. With the battle truly over, Abel thanked Ryo, but Ryo brushed it off. Words are cheap. If you really want to thank me, dinner's on you tonight. Arthur, an advisor from the Royal Magician's Bureau, introduced himself and praised Ryo for saving them all. But Ryo insisted it was nothing, he'd never ignore people in trouble. What bothered him, though, was that if he'd arrived earlier, more lives might have been saved. Arthur agreed and said once the mages recovered, they'd gather the remains of the fallen for a proper burial. Abel then asked Ryo to help collect magic stones from the devils to support the victims' families. Ryo agreed, though something was still nagging at him. When he'd dropped from the 39th floor, he'd felt a strange barrier, which vanished after the demon prince's death. He'd also sensed something odd near the staircase. They planned to check it later, but for now, collecting stones came first. Arthur, despite all his years of study, admitted he'd never seen a devil's stone before. Since devils seemed to appear from nowhere, some suspected they used space-time magic, but no one had ever proven it. Elsewhere, the hero's party activated an altar and summoned what they believed was the Demon Lord. Instead, Leonore stepped through the portal. The hero called her the Demon Lord, which confused her. She wasn't. She just sensed strange energy and came to check it out. But when she learned he was a hero, she got excited. Heroes were supposed to be strong. Unfortunately, this one was laughably weak. With a single lazy swing, her blade went straight through his chest. Disappointed, Leonore told the rest of the group to just go home. She even spared the hero, pointing out he'd live if treated quickly. Taking her mercy, his party rushed to heal him. Leonore, meanwhile, grabbed the summoning gem, pocketed it, and corrected them again. She was not the Demon Lord. The party couldn't believe it. If she wasn't, how could she be so strong? Leonore just shrugged. Compared to her, they were all weak. She even said if they worked together, they might actually be able to beat the real Demon Lord. But compared to Ryo, they were nothing. She'd fought him once, and in her words, he was about 10,000 times stronger than this so-called hero. With that, she vanished. Back in the dungeon, Ryo and the others reached the staircase. There, he showed Arthur the oddity. He'd sensed a strange magic gem. Arthur, baffled, decided to take it for research. They returned to the surface, where Hugh tended to the wounded. Abel thanked Natalie for fetching Ryo, admitting they wouldn't have survived without her. Hugh was relieved too, but he still confronted Ryo for breaking dungeon rules. Ryo apologized, but Arthur defended him, saying without Ryo they'd all be dead. In private, Arthur explained everything to Hugh about the devils, the demon prince, and Ryo's overwhelming strength. Hugh was stunned. He knew Ryo was skilled, but not that skilled. Arthur made it clear, their priority now was keeping Ryo on good terms with the kingdom. If he ever turned against them, the result would be catastrophic. He even suggested erasing all records of Ryo's true power to keep nobles from trying to exploit him. The next morning, Ryo smelled something delicious and followed it to a curry shop only to bump into Syrah. The two shared a meal, and Syrah was impressed to learn Ryo had been promoted straight to D rank when he registered. Afterwards, she invited him for a sparring match. In the arena, Ryo quickly realized Syrah's speed was insane, especially when she got serious. He held out for a while, but eventually she overwhelmed him. Instead of being disappointed, Syrah hugged him in excitement. Not many could last that long against her, especially when she was boosting herself with wind magic and he wasn't using magic at all. Sadly, she had to leave for tutoring duty, so they parted ways. On his way back, Ryo ran into Hugh, who offered him a ride to the guild. Hugh said he was grateful for everything Ryo had done, but rules were rules. Ryo still needed to be punished for breaking into the dungeon. The punishment, however, was just a job, an escort mission to Whitnash. Ryo thought it was way too light to be considered a punishment, but Hugh told him not to overthink it.